This is Joy, and today I am making a short presentation on Jonathan Edwards and his approach to the differing ways that God works in people's lives. In 1740, Puritan pastor Jonathan Edwards wrote a tract, which was more like a booklet, called Thoughts on the Revival of Religion in New England. In it, Edwards calls believers to realize God's work in the world apart from one's own experiences. Edward writes, "When there has been a long-continued deadness, and many are brought out of a state of nature in so extraordinary a manner, and filled with such uncommon degrees of light, it is natural for such to form their notions of a state of grace wholly from what they experience." He continues, "They, therefore, forming their idea of a state of grace only by their own experience, no wonder that it appears an insuperable difficulty to them to reconcile such a state." And he's implying a state that would be different from what they experience. Edwards' comments here continue to be instructive for us today as we recognize that God works in different ways in the lives of each of us. Consider the apostles, for instance. We have St. Peter, who was the first disciple called in Matthew's gospel, but then his life is one, especially in the Gospels, of ups and downs. Some downs would be when he doubts Christ and sinks into the water, and then at the crucifixion, before the crucifixion, during the trial, when he denies Christ 3 times. But then later, Peter becomes the apostle to the Jews. Paul's story is different. It has more of an upward trajectory. Paul begins by persecuting followers of Jesus. He has this huge transformational life change on the road to Damascus, immediately becomes a follower of Christ, and after only about 3 days, he starts preaching in the synagogue the gospel of Christ. Other disciples, who we know less about, seem to have different paths than both of these. Disciple Thomas, for instance, is not interested in believing the resurrection until he's able to see and experience it with his own eyes and hands by touching the wounds of Christ. He wasn't the only apostle or disciple who doubted. In the end of Matthew 28, before Jesus gives what we call the Great Commission, it says that some of the apostles believed, but some doubted. And so Thomas wasn't the only one. This is a good reminder for us as we approach the differing tensions about stories of Christ and the way God works in each of our lives. It's easy to make our path and our own experience the right one from which we judge other people's, but it's wise to remember that this is a great mystery, as Edwards wrote, and that we are called to approach these differences with much, much grace.